So again, Ian, thank you for having me, and good morning, everybody. I truly appreciate everyone taking the time this morning to let me introduce Chimeric to you, and I am really excited to be kicking off the conference today. So Chimeric Therapeutics is a clinical stage cell therapy company focused in oncology. Very simply, what that means is that the drugs that we develop are for patients with cancer, and the drugs that we develop use live cells. In its most basic form, live cell therapy is a blood transfusion. Nowadays, we just engineer those cells to be quite a bit more sophisticated to help keep patients with cancer. It's also important to note that we're a clinical stage company, which means that we've moved beyond, with our lead asset, preclinical development, or all of the work that needs to be done before in the labs before you actually are able to start to look at your therapies in patients. So let me tell you a little bit more about Chimeric. Chimeric was listed on the ASX in January of this year, and we thank everyone for their support. We were heavily oversubscribed, and we raised $35 million to get us off and starting. Our lead asset, the chlorotoxin CAR-T, or CHM1101, is advancing now through a phase 1 clinical trial. We recently announced the acquisition of our second asset, a CDH17 novel CAR-T from the University of Pennsylvania, which is one of the top cell therapy centers in the world. And we continue to look to build out our pipeline as we look to discover additional innovative assets that really have the ability to cure patients of cancer. We do all that with a team of people that actually have an incredible amount of experience and expertise in developing cell therapies. These are very unique therapies, and we're really excited at the way our team is able to leverage our experience to move those therapies rapidly through to clinic. So cell therapy is actually the most invested space that there is today in biotech. In the first 6 months of 2021 alone, there was over $6.6 billion invested in cell therapy IO. In the last 3 years, there's been 232% growth in the investment in this space compared to the NASDAQ index for biotech companies at about 153%. And what you can see on the right is the opportunity that comes for these companies as we start to develop our assets. You see very significant IPOs for companies like Sana and Instill that happened in the first 6 months of this year. Follow-on offerings for Fate and Iovance well into the hundreds of millions of dollars, and partnerships. And you continually see partnership announcements in this space that are upwards of $500, $1 billion into $2 and $3 billion. All of that investment comes in this space because of what we refer to as the promise of cell therapy. I've worked in oncology for a very long time, and all of the drugs that I've worked on developing up until I entered cell therapy really look to just delay disease progression for patients, to give patients an extra 6 months, year, 2 years to survive or before their cancer progresses and they have to look for another therapy. Cell therapies actually look for cures, and I've been fortunate enough to meet patients who have been cured by cell therapy. And so our mission is actually to find and develop and commercialize to bring those patients the therapies that will cure their cancers. For us, in pursuit of that mission, we focus in 3 very specific areas. In discovery, so that means that we're out there looking all the time for the most promising assets that we believe have innovation and science behind them that will lead to cures for cancer. In development, so really looking at how do we move those therapies from that preclinical lab space into a phase 1 trial and then advance them rapidly into phase 2 registration trials. And then we also focus on commercialization. That's how we look to bring the patients actually bring the patients the therapies. And so that's where we really believe having a team of experts in this area allows us to get those patients the therapies more quickly. From a discovery perspective, when we're thinking about how we bring in assets or what assets we're looking for, we're looking very strategically for assets that are in oncology, either solid tumors or blood cancers. We focus on assets that kind of hit in one of 3 buckets. The first is that they have novel CAR designs. So those can be CAR Ts, or chimeric antigen receptors, that are novel antigen targets. So they're able to attach themselves to novel antigens on cancer cells, that are third generation constructs or dual antigen constructs. We're also looking for allogeneic cell sources. And that very simply means that it's a therapy that is off the shelf. It's not one that requires you to send away your own cells and wait for them to come back. You can readily get it off the shelf. And then finally, we focus on looking at alternative cell types. The therapies that we're working on developing right now are T-cell therapies. We're also really interested in the promise of therapies that leverage things like NK cells as well. Recently, as I mentioned, we were incredibly excited to discover an asset that we think not only is novel, but has incredible promise for patients. We announced that we licensed from the University of Pennsylvania a CDH17 CAR T. This is a third generation CAR T, which uses a novel antigen target, CDH17. And the University of Pennsylvania is well regarded and widely known as the home to the very first CAR T to be approved in the United States, and is an expert in cell therapy development. This particular CAR T, I'm going to show you some data just a little bit in a second that talks to broad applicability. So this CAR T we see working in numerous tumor types, so being able to help many, many patients. There's robust intellectual property around this particular asset, and we're very excited that we've been able to secure a 3-year research commitment with Dr. Waugh, the inventor of this therapy. This is showing you the preclinical efficacy that we saw with this CAR T. And so what you actually see is the green line is the CDH17 CAR T that we licensed. The yellow and the black lines are sort of what would happen normally. What you see with the yellow and black lines is that essentially, if you left it untreated, the cancer or the tumor would continue to grow. It would get bigger and bigger. With the red line, which was a second generation therapy, you can see that the tumor doesn't grow quite as quickly. But the green line is what had us so excited and what really had us moving to license this therapy. It's that the tumor is completely eradicated by this third generation CDH17 CAR T, and it actually never returns. In this particular experiment, it usually only goes out 30 days. We actually had this experiment extended out to 49 days to actually see whether or not the tumor would ever relapse. And as you can see from the green line, it doesn't. So we're incredibly excited about what this CAR T has in terms of its potential to help patients. Because of what we've seen here in its preclinical efficacy, we're actually going to move this CAR T into development right away for patients with 4 different tumor types. All 4 of these tumor types have very high unmet medical needs, which really means that the existing therapies out there aren't doing the job. Neuroendocrine tumors, particular patients with metastatic disease, colorectal cancer patients, gastric cancer patients, and pancreatic cancer patients. You can see that the 5-year survival for metastatic disease for any of those tumor types is 15% or less. So we're going to take CDH17 CAR and we're going to move it into a basket trial, which will allow us to study it in patients that have any one of these 4 disease types. Our plan for now until the end of this year is to really finish off all the preclinical work that will be needed to support that trial, to prepare for all of the technical operations, vector manufacturing, drug product manufacturing that comes along with cell therapy, and then to move in 2022 into filing our IND and opening up the phase 1 clinical trial at the University of Pennsylvania. From there, we plan to expand the trial to a second clinical site. So this is really exciting for us, the CDH17 CAR, and being able to license it and now move it into the clinic next year. From development, we're also incredibly excited about the progress that we've made this year with our founding or leading asset, chlortoxin CAR T, or CHM1101. The background on this CAR T cell therapy is a little bit unique. It actually uses Deathstalker scorpion venom as its tumor targeting domain, and that was certainly novel. What we saw preclinically with this CAR T was that it actually bound to glioblastoma cells better than anything else that was tested, and that it also was able to kill glioblastoma cells better than anything else that was tested. So we were pretty excited to be able to move this asset into the phase 1 clinical trial as well. Now, as I mentioned right at the beginning, this is the asset that is already in a phase 1 clinical trial. And the objective of the phase 1 clinical trial is to assess the safety, but also to determine what the right phase 2 dose is. As we move eventually from this trial into the phase 2 trial, the phase 2 trial will be what brings us to commercialization. It'll actually allow us to move forward with regulatory approval. So here we need to be able to show that this therapy is not only safe and efficacious, but also determine what is the right dose for patients, or the optimal dose. We plan in this trial to enroll somewhere between 18 and 36 patients across 4 dose levels and 2 routes of administration. And I'll just take you through that briefly. When we started this trial at the very lowest dose level, we were giving the cells through 1 route of administration. Essentially, a patient was having a brain surgery, and during that surgery, they were inserting a catheter into the patient's brain, and it was through that catheter that these cells were actually administered. So that was intratumoral administration. We were very pleased to be able to announce in April that we completed the dosing of patients in that dose level. All patients had done well in terms of side effects, so there were no dose-limiting toxicities, and we were able to move forward to the second dose level. In the second dose level, we actually doubled the dose that we're administering to patients, and we also are now giving the CAR T cells through a second route of administration. We're giving them through that original intratumoral administration, or the catheter that was placed in the brain in the tumor, but we're also giving it through a second catheter that's being placed interventricular for patients. And so you can see the diagram here on the screen of what that looks like. As we continue to move forward in the trial, all of the rest of the patients will receive the therapy through those 2 routes of administration, and we'll simply start increasing the dose more and more. In the second dose cohort, we actually started the dosing on our first patient at the end of May, and we're still progressing through that dose cohort. And later this year, we plan to be able to give everybody an update on how this trial is advancing and how the patients that have been dosed in this trial are doing. So very excited about the progress we've made with chlorotoxin. We also just announced, and this was weeks ago, that we actually had received FDA clearance for our first Chimeric IND for chlorotoxin. And really what that means is it means that we've got up the foundation now to expand our development program for chlorotoxin. We're now able to move that phase 1 clinical trial from being at 1 site or 1 hospital to multiple sites. So we're rapidly going to look to open up additional sites for the trial. We're also then able to move into a solid tumor basket trial, which is something that we've been working on behind the scenes for a while. We've really been looking at what are the tumor types that we believe outside of glioblastoma, where it's currently being looked at in the clinical trial, that is going to offer the most promise for patients. And right now, the number 1 or the leading site is metastatic melanoma. Past that, we're also looking at prostate cancer and colorectal cancer for patients. And then finally, we've already started preparations for that all-important phase 2 trial. In cell therapy, a phase 2 trial, particularly in the disease areas that we're looking at in glioblastoma, we actually believe will be a registration trial. We're already designing and preparing everything that we need for that trial so that we can move quickly from the phase 1 to the registration phase 2 trial. All of the development and discovery work that we're doing right now is truly enabled by this incredible team that we've started to put together. Just our management team right now, the 4 people that you see on screen, have worked on 4 out of the 5 existing CAR T therapies. So we've all seen how these therapies develop right from preclinical all the way through to commercialization and global commercialization. And we've had the opportunity together work on 25 or over 25 cell therapies, which really gives us a lot of insight into how these therapies need to be developed, how we foresee all of the things that are going to come with development in this area, so we can make sure that these therapies get out to patients as soon as possible. So for Chimeric, we've really started to build a pipeline that we believe brings that promise of cell therapy to more patients, that really starts to look at bringing curative therapies to patients with solid tumors in cancer right now. As we head into the end of 2021, you can see that this year has been an incredibly busy time for us, but we still have lots to do before the end of this year. We, as I mentioned, earlier this year, completed some of the initial dose cohorts on our clinical trial. We've received our IND clearance for chlorotoxin, and we had licensed our CDH17. We're now going to go forward, complete the preclinical trials and the IND enabling trials for those assets, and next year look to continue development clinically as we open up the CDH17 trial and the basket trial for chlorotoxin. So with that, I thank you very much for your time and for letting me tell you a little bit more about Chimeric Therapeutics. And I really look forward to bringing you more updates as we continue to develop and our assets move forward. Thank you.